What happens when a country spends years testing the limits of diplomacy and suddenly runs out of time? Right now, the Middle East is moving toward another dangerous turning point. A ceasefire offer from Iran has reportedly been rejected by the United States, and the fragile calm that followed months of confrontation now looks weaker than ever. Behind closed doors, diplomats are racing, military planners are watching, oil markets are nervous, and regional powers know one wrong move could trigger a chain reaction no one can easily stop. This is not just about one negotiation. It is about nuclear pressure, military deterrence, political survival, and the balance of power across the entire region. But this is where things changed. The gap between what Washington wants and what Tehran is willing to accept appears wider than ever. One side wants deep restrictions and structural concessions. The other wants sanctions relief, recognition, and security guarantees. With deadlines approaching, the question is no longer whether tensions exist. The real question is what happens next. Tonight, we break down what led to this moment, why the ceasefire proposal failed, and why the next few days could reshape the future of the Middle East. Chapter 1. What happened? 600, 700 words. To understand today's crisis, we need to go back to the pattern that defined this conflict for years. According to the source script, Iran was accused of using negotiations as a delaying strategy, extending talks, resisting core demands, and continuing sensitive nuclear activity while avoiding a final confrontation. The belief behind that strategy was simple. The West would keep negotiating indefinitely, but recent events suggest that assumption no longer holds. American officials reportedly entered talks with a proposal centered on one major demand: no domestic uranium enrichment capability inside Iran. In return, the United States would support Iran's civilian nuclear energy needs through outside fuel supply arrangements. On paper, it was presented as a path to civilian energy without military risk, but Iran refused. What happened next shocked analysts. The disagreement was not only about technical details, it exposed a deeper issue. Trust had collapsed. Washington believed Tehran was buying time. Tehran believed Washington was demanding surrender by another name. That mistrust became even more dangerous after large-scale military operations described in the source material. Coordinated U.S. and Israeli strikes reportedly targeted Iranian military and nuclear-related infrastructure after long-term planning. Officials framed the campaign as an effort to degrade Iran's ability to sustain combat operations and reduce strategic threats. Whether one agrees with that strategy or not, the result was clear. The diplomatic environment changed completely. Iran was no longer negotiating from a position of confidence. The country was dealing with military losses, internal pressure, and growing uncertainty over leadership stability. Reports in the provided script described heavy casualties among senior commanders and major disruption across the security structure, and this is where the strategy becomes clear. Military pressure was not separate from diplomacy. It became part of diplomacy. Every strike, every sanction, every naval movement, and every public statement increased leverage at the negotiating table. Meanwhile, regional actors began stepping in. Pakistan hosted talks in Islamabad. Other countries, including Egypt and Turkey, were reportedly involved in mediation efforts. That tells us something important. Many governments fear the consequences of failure, because if talks collapse, the fallout will not stay inside Iran or Israel or the United States. It could spread across shipping lanes, energy markets, and neighboring states already dealing with their own instability. So when the latest ceasefire offer was rejected, it was more than a diplomatic setback. It was a warning sign that the crisis is entering a new phase. Chapter 2. Escalation and Strategy, 600, 700 words. Now let's talk about why this situation is so dangerous. A ceasefire normally freezes conflict and creates space for compromise. But in this case, the ceasefire appears to have become another battlefield, used by each side to gain time, improve leverage, and test the other's resolve. The United States reportedly wants far-reaching concessions, dismantling key enrichment facilities handing over large stockpiles of highly enriched uranium and making a credible long-term commitment against weaponization. These are not symbolic demands. They would fundamentally reshape Iran's strategic capabilities. Iran, on the other hand, has reportedly demanded sanctions relief, recognition of enrichment rights, withdrawal of some military pressure, and compensation linked to war damage. Those positions are equally significant and politically difficult. That means both sides are asking for outcomes the other side sees as unacceptable. But the real impact came later. While diplomats argue, military pressure continues in the background. The source script references a naval blockade and the possibility of renewed strikes if negotiations fail. That creates a powerful message. Talks are open, but the cost of failure may rise quickly. This is classic coercive strategy, combining force and diplomacy at the same time. Then there is the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 1/5 of global oil flows through that narrow waterway. Even the threat of disruption there can shake markets worldwide. If Iran chooses to escalate using maritime pressure, the consequences could go far beyond the region. Fuel prices, shipping insurance, and global inflation could all be affected, and this is where things become even more complicated. Internal divisions inside Iran may now matter as much as external pressure. The source material describes tension among factions and signs of weakening cohesion within parts of the security system. If true, that creates a problem for negotiators. Who can actually make and enforce a deal? A government divided internally often struggles to compromise externally. That uncertainty gives Washington more leverage, but it also increases risk. A fragmented leadership can produce unpredictable decisions. One faction may want negotiations, another may prefer escalation, another may simply try to survive politically. Meanwhile, international pressure is expanding. Additional sanctions discussions, diplomatic alignment efforts, and terrorism designations mentioned in the source script suggest the conflict is no longer a bilateral dispute. It is becoming part of a wider geopolitical contest involving allies and regional blocs, so the strategic picture now has 4 layers: nuclear demands, military deterrence, internal political struggle, global economic risk. Any one of those would be serious on its own. Together, they create one of the most volatile crises in the world right now. Chapter 3, Impact and What Comes Next. 300-400 words. So where does this go from here? There are 3 realistic paths. First, emergency diplomacy succeeds. Mediators narrow the gaps, both sides return to talks, and a temporary arrangement prevents immediate escalation. This would not solve the deeper conflict, but it could buy time. Second, negotiations stall completely. In that scenario, military pressure resumes, regional tensions rise, and markets react fast. Even limited strikes or maritime incidents could create global economic shockwaves. Third, the most unpredictable outcome. Internal political changes inside Iran alter the negotiating landscape. If power shifts between factions, a new strategy could emerge or total confusion could follow. But one fact is already clear. The old status quo is gone. The period where this issue could be managed through routine statements and endless rounds of talks appears to be over. The stakes are now higher, the demands are harder, and the room for error is smaller. What happens next may depend on decisions made in the coming days, not months. Will both sides step back from the edge? Will pressure force compromise? Or are we watching the opening chapter of a larger regional confrontation? The world is now waiting for the answer, and whatever comes next, the Middle East crisis will not remain a local story. It could shape energy prices, alliances, security policy, and global politics far beyond the region.